So now we have landed in the fourth piece of our puzzle, right? Which is, how do we supply water to these plants? So you saw how soil must be prepared, how seeds must be sown, and then you saw how manures and fertilizers will be helpful for the growth and health of plants. And also how to not use fertilizers a lot. So you control their use. Now we are on this question of irrigation. Let's keep this right in the middle so that we know what irrigation is. What is irrigation, by the way? To be able to give plants a constant supply of water, so that farmers don't have to, they don't have to wait for the rain gods to be kind to them, right? So that's what we're trying to do. One of the questions that you might already have is, why do plants need water? What does water do for them? Don't you already have that? Do you not? So once that, and what else could be there? Yeah. What are the sources of water? Where do we get this water from? Second question. What other question could you have? How much water to give? Is there something called too much water? Maybe, right? Because you know that when there are these floods, they say that these plants are rotted away because none of the water left. So if you let these plants stay in too much water also, they die. So that's another question. What is the frequency of giving water to these plants? That's another one. And what methods do we use to give water to these plants? How do we give it exactly? So we have a source. How do we give it to the plants? So are your questions ready? So that now that your questions are ready, you can actively engage and try to answer these questions as we go along in this particular episode, which is about irrigation. Question 1 was what? How do we, or why do we, rather, right? The first question is why. Why do plants need water? So like you, like me, plants also need water. 90% of their bodies is water, right? Even ours is lesser. Do you know how much percentage of water we have? Yeah, if you already know it, great. Otherwise, go and find out. It's somewhere around 70%, right? Yeah. So when you think about this, plants need water to be inside. One, because all the nutrients they absorb from the soil are absorbed by them dissolving in water. So the root begins to start sucking in now water, and a lot of nutrients that are dissolved in water comes along with it. So if there's no water, then there's nothing much that the root can do to absorb these nutrients. So most of the nutrients that plants need are soluble, or are kind of dissolved in water. So that's one reason. So which also means that even the seed won't germinate without water. So whether you want the seed to germinate or if you want the plant to absorb nutrients, you need to supply it with the right amount of water. Now also, very, very commonly, you might have seen the water cycle that's being drawn. Yeah, have you seen the water cycle? How the water leaves from evaporates from the oceans and then goes along as clouds, and then it drops back as rain, it flows back as rivers and then falls into the ocean or the river. Or it falls into rivers and then into the ocean. Do you know this, don't you? Now what's interesting here is they don't really draw a very, very, very important part of this picture. They show it as if most of the water that evaporates out of the seas and the oceans and probably other open places like rivers. But the truth is, a large amount of water that goes into the atmosphere goes from plants. Plants do what is called transpiration. You take a leaf of a plant, water is leaving that, right? Very, very often, lots of the water that comes into the atmosphere is from these plants. It's very rarely drawn at the water table. It's something that's been taught for years, but such an important aspect is usually not told at all. And now you know this, don't you? So you think that plants are just there for the purposes we think they are. There's one more purpose they really serve, and that is to be able to add water to the atmosphere. So cutting down plants has one more problem now. That is also that we might not get rains because no water is going up. So there are many, many, many reasons why cutting plants down is a problem for us. You know already many of them. I'm just adding one more to that list of reasons why we should not cut trees, and rather we should be planting more whenever possible, right? So the thing here is that plants transpire a lot of water, which means that the water content in a plant is easily lost. So again, we have to replenish that with water. Or the other thing is that if there is a hot wind, there's a hot current, then there's a chance that the plant can dry up. So water saves it at that time. So either when it gets really hot, like a hot current, or if it gets really cold, like frost. In both these cases, water in the plant helps it survive. So I think we've made the case for why water is important very, very clear, right? Yeah, you got all your reasons in, didn't you? The fact that 90% of the plant is water, all the nutrients are absorbed through water, germination can't happen without water, it helps the plant from hot and really, really cold. So the next question that you would have had is, how much water, how frequently? Now you know that this differs from plant to plant, right? Which is why we had our Kharif and Rabi crops. Kharif crops require more water, for example rice. And if you think about the frequency that is required, that is also going to change. is that going to change from crop to crop, or is it also going to change from season to season? Let me give you an example. In summer, do you think you'll need to water the plants more or less? That's right, you have to water the plants more. Why exactly? Because more water is leaving through evaporation from those leaves, which is called what? Transpiration. So that's another word that you can remember so that you can talk to other people about it. So when you say, instead of saying this big line, right? Evaporation from the leaves, you can just say transpiration and they'll understand. So which means we are left with two more questions. So we look at the sources first. Here are some very, very common sources. In India, the most common sources are wells, the most common thing, right? You would have seen a normal, boring, mundane well. Yeah. You also have tube wells, very similar to wells, except that you don't really have the traditional circle you can fall into, but there's a tube that's dug deep inside the earth and water starts coming out of that. So another thing you can have is a river. Of course, if you're really lucky to have a river around you, then you have a river as a source. You can also have a pond, which gets filled up through rain. Yeah. So if you have a pond or a river, great. Or you could take a huge river and then build a canal out of it. So you can have a canal as well. So you have wells, you have tube wells, you have ponds, rivers and canals. So these are the usual sources of irrigation for most of India. You don't have anything else. So most of the times you build a big dam to be able to build canals out of it and then supply water to a large amount of area, irrigate a large area of cultivatable land. So we've answered almost all the questions we tried to answer in this module. So the last question we're left with is, what are the methods that we can use to take water from the source and send it to the fields where we want it to go? So there are again some traditional methods. So if you have a question about are there different methods? Yes, there are. Traditional methods and modern or sophisticated methods. So let's look at the traditional ones first. Now, you could dig a moat. So what you do is that you take water from the wells and pour it into this moat and guide it to go towards wherever field you want it to go. So this is a very small scale thing. You could also use a chain pump, and as you can see, it does pretty much what exactly it claims to do using a chain pump. That's also a traditional method. You can use a dekli or a rahat, which is a lever system as well. Now these pictures are pretty self-explanatory as to what they do. A lot more interesting are the modern methods, which you have definitely seen somewhere or the other because it's very difficult to miss. This first method, called a sprinkler, is very difficult to miss. You have a vertical pipe stuck to the ground and it's connected somewhere to a big pump, right? Or a large source of water. Then what happens? There's a lot of pressure. You open this tube out, right? This little thing out. It starts to sprinkle water like a fountain. Thereby it covers an area, right? Sometimes you can even make it rotate so that it's putting it out in all directions. So that's a sprinkler. Very, very efficient method to start sending. It's almost as if the plants you're simulating rain. As far as the crops go, they wouldn't know if it's raining because it's not like water is coming below them. It's actually raining on top of them, right? Now, if the water supply is very, very poor, you have to really save water. It's a very interesting, sophisticated method. The second amongst our modern methods called the drip irrigation. Now, why is it called drip irrigation? Because you're trying to give water drop by drop. It's almost as if you're hand feeding a baby, right? Give a huge amount of, chunk of food to a baby. The baby might just, it can't really handle all of it. Yeah? Anyway, it's only going to eat one mouthful at a time. So what's the point in shoving all that water in? It might even go waste. So drip irrigation actually supplies water just at the rate and speed at which the plants can assimilate it. They can eat it, right? So drip irrigation is very, very, very economical. So you have an entire system of pipes and tubes whereby each plant gets the right amount of water drop by drop by drop. So it's very economical, it's very efficient and goes right to the root. These outlets are there right at the root. Now one of my friends has a dad who is an old IIT and he passed out long ago, and he has built a house where he reuses the water from his own, there are toilets and all of that. A lot of water that gets used, right, from bathing. All that water is not just into the drainage. So his house is not connected to the drainage at all, but he has a garden around his house, which he really, really likes. And what he does is that he's being an engineer and being a person who really likes engineering, a true engineer. What he's done is that he's taken all that water and recycled it behind the house so that it goes through a lot of layers, it gets purified. And then he's connected it to a huge set of pipes which constantly drip irrigate his gardens. So especially for fruits and for gardens, this sort of a sprinkler or a drip mechanism is very, very efficient, especially if you have less water. Because in most cities today, in urban areas, water is it's a very scarce resource. So he has figured out a way to make it so that he doesn't waste so much water in order to be able to maintain a good garden. So he uses the water that he bathes in to go and water the plants as well. It was beautiful when I watched it because all of a sudden at a particular time you start seeing water dripping and all the plants are getting their supply of water. So So in this module, if you've really followed along, what you'll know is that plants are, so if you take irrigation as your central idea, right? And if you take another example of how to take notes, interestingly, you know that plants are the central idea over here. And you have this first idea that plants are 90% water. And you want to know why. So the first question being why plants need so much water. And you know what the reasons are. Seeds can't germinate, and water gets the nutrients inside. It helps it from extreme conditions. And you know that the frequency by which and the amount of water depends upon which crop and which season. For example, in summer, you will put more water. And then you'll talk about the sources of water, which are wells, tube wells, canals, rivers, and ponds. And then you look at the methods. You have traditional methods and modern methods. Traditional ones being, yes, go ahead. Yeah, take a minute to think about what the traditional methods are. And once you have them, go ahead and put them there. What are they? Moats. That's right, chain pumps, Dakhlis and Rahats. And you also have modern methods, which are sprinklers and, that's right, drip irrigation systems. So this picture for you can be a kind of a note that you can save very easily in your head, so that you understand that irrigation falls under all of these things put together. Now that you followed along clearly, in the next module, what's waiting and already queued up is how do we harvest now that you've done all of this, right? And also just before that, what's waiting is how do we take care that weeds are not consuming our place. So the next two modules waiting for you are weeds, how to remove them, how to protect our plants from them, and how to celebrate by harvesting them. So we'll see you there.